The big question is, how do you mine more responsibly? Where is this going to come from? And how do you make sure that one, you're trying to address climate change? How do you build resilient communities? How you do this not at the expense of people and not at the expense of planet? How do we mitigate the negative impact? How do we leverage the resources so that those local communities, those governments can also benefit from it?
I think for Quadrature and other climate philanthropies, our entry point is one step up. It's the energy question. It's about ensuring that in country, in situ, we don't want to see low carbon poverty in middle countries. That's the absolute last thing we need to do. And one of the things that we're most concerned about, obviously, is around energy emissions. Cutting emissions means decarbonizing how we generate power, how we transport ourselves. And that led to some real deep thinking around and the realization that actually mining sector is at the foundation of any success that we might have in terms of achieving the energy transition and our climate targets. But you can't talk about climate change and the energy transition without also talking about development and where these two things intersect. So we have to think very deeply about where the minerals come from, which countries. A large proportion of these minerals come from developing countries that are amongst the most heavily impacted by the impacts of climate change. How then do we support those countries to be able to meet the need for the global transition, which right now is primarily driven by developed and industrialized nations, but developed countries will also need access to those same technologies, those same resources. So how do we create this win-win situation while also expanding mining, but not being naive about some of the legacy impacts of mining that exists? How do we build the capacity in countries and communities to be able to actively participate within this new climate reality? So we were thinking about how to unlock speed, scale, and sustainability. Mining sector is very good at rebalancing those market forces. What's actually key for us in our interest is holding true to the North Star of climate change, but ensuring that it's resilient society. So how do we make that mining as responsible as possible? Is there a common understanding of what the vision is that we're all drawing towards? So one of the things, you talked about the role of the mining sector in relieving oil fields. It's a lot of pressure to place on one sector. And the truth is, I don't believe you can achieve any of that without true partnership. It's a process. We are thinking about things, we want them to happen fast. It's occupational hazard, urgency, everything is urgent in a finding space. But actually in reality, 5-10 years to get new policy in place, 15-20 years to get a new mine in place. And how long does it take to transition a new economic sector? 20 years. So that kind of foresight is required. How do we think about mapping a new economic development pathway that is built on climate, on the mining sector, requires clean and renewable energy, but is moving at pace and generating value, different levels? So we need data, we need new economic models, we need thinkers, academics. That's where we come in. We need support to be able to convene people. The kind of philanthropy is not the right partner, not necessarily the right messenger to do that, but who are the right organizations and the right institutions that can convene people and bring them together to start thinking about what change is required, and how really thinking about what's the systemic play and how do you draw the digital actors together to be able to pull together in the same direction. This transition is not going to be possible with so much pressure on one actor. It's going to require new forms of partnership, new forms of engagement, and a real kind of partnership model at all levels, whether that's community, whether that's country, whether that's region.
All people used to say it's about giving back. So today where we are, and the young generation, let's say, they're privileged because they are reaping. So we're living in a society where everything is easy. You have access real time to computers, information. So compared to where their grandparents were, today they are very privileged that society has given them everything that makes life easy at the cost. And that's, I think, where the challenge is. Young generation, they look at it from, okay, so we have to clean up the planet because we have one planet. I think it's a very powerful message for a young person to see that they would be part of the solution, not part of the problem. So I think there is something here for the young generation to take it from the different perspective of, so if we want to be part of the solution, we cannot ignore that the mining sector is one of the sectors that is at the core of it. Because without those resources, you will not have your electric vehicle. You will not be able to have other alternative sources of energy to transition away from fossil fuels. So it's not to say that we have to promote mining, we have to promote the solutions. And mining is part of the solution. And the young generation, because they are young, they are even a bigger part of that solution.